Hello, everyone. Welcome back to 584 Vetoes, the podcast dedicated to finding ways to slow down federal spending. I'm Tom Church, and today I'm joined by my new colleague, Brian Miller. Brian, how are you?
I am doing well.
Brian, today you're going to help me figure out why we don't allow physicians to own hospitals and instead prefer to help big hospitals consolidate the market.
Well, aren't we naughty? Isn't that why?
I think we're supposed to be working on good policy that, makes things cheaper for people, but
No. I mean, aren't physicians naughty, and that's why we're not allowed to own hospitals.
I don't think so. I think most people like doctors. I think most people,
I
in
like
fact,
doctors.
like their doctors.
I like my doctor. I love my primary care doctor. I think he should be able to own the hospital. Don't you?
I do. I absolutely. We're going to get into this. Hang on, Brian,
Yeah.
because you haven't been on this podcast with us, and I need you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a new visiting fellow here at Hoover, associate professor of medicine at Hopkins. I practice hospital medicine. I run a large health policy research group, which is a lot of fun. I previously worked for all the three-letter agencies that regulate healthcare that occasionally provoke four-letter responses from their regulatory actions, but they're fun. I worked at CMS running an ACO program, the Federal Trade Commission on mergers, the FDA on drug review, and the FCC on standards development for tech. I currently now serve on MedPAC, and I'm also the vice chairman of the North Carolina State Health Plan Board, which is a $750,000 member plan with almost $5 billion in expenditures. I should note that my views are my own and not necessarily those of MedPAC's.
Indeed. Our views are always our own. Let's be clear
Absolutely.
about that.
Nobody else wants our especially no one else wants our views, including our wives.
There we go. Yeah. Who I'm not even going to ask if yours listens to you when you podcast. We'll move on.
She doesn't listen to me at a podcast, and I would say she's probably tired of hearing at health policy at the dinner table too, because it just never stops.
It's ongoing. I don't know that we're ever going to fix this, but we're going to try. Well, Brian, one, it sounds like you have had a lot of positions. I'm going to make a little joke about, can you hold down a job? But really, let's be honest, you can.
Yes.
You, in fact, like to hold many jobs at once.
That's the problem.
That is the problem. So your job today is to help me figure out what's going on here. So some quick background. What we're talking about is Section 6001 of the Affordable Care Act. So when the Affordable Care Act was passed, new physician-owned hospitals were prevented from basically forming again. They're prevented from taking Medicare patients or Medicare dollars, and in a sense basically froze the formation of new doctor-owned hospitals. At that point, there were something like 250 operating in the states. These are facilities. We can get into what they do and who they compete with and where they work, but we're still at about 250 in the US because you can't really start new ones again at this point. And I want to talk about like why that happened. I mean, why was this part of the Affordable Care Act, which is supposed to make care more affordable? And you and I are, market-based people and price theory people who think more supply is good, competition is good. That's how you lower prices. So why was this included in the ACA?
I think horse trading and fear of competition, just to be honest. So the hospital industry didn't really like physician autonomy. And so they made a political bet that if they prevented physicians from owning and operating businesses and physicians turned into employees, that would be an easier to manage workforce, more efficient, et cetera. And then they wouldn't face competitive pressure from businesses that are owned and operated differently, arguably better. Unfortunately, of course, the employed physician workforce has not turned out well for the industry or frankly for the country in terms of cost, efficiency, or productivity. So a lot of this came because the industry was convinced that physicians would pick the healthiest patients, right? That physicians know better and physicians would take all the good patients to their hospital and that the community hospital would be left with sick patients and be, essentially go out of business. So there were a couple of problems with that argument, actually. One problem with that argument is, let's say that did happen, which it didn't, but let's say that did happen. What that means is that your risk adjustment isn't good and that you need to fix risk adjustment because if the patients are sick, you probably need to pay more. And if the other patients are healthier at the other facility, you probably should pay them less, right? So that's like
which is a thing that we do constantly, right?
Yeah, risk adjustment is something we do all throughout Medicare and through other payment markets. And that's an empirical problem that somebody could solve. But we chose not to solve it, and instead, ban a business model. The other argument was, so that in addition to cherry picking patients, that physician-owned hospitals were not quote unquote full service hospitals. They didn't have emergency rooms, and they didn't want pregnant women, and they didn't that they were bad actors and dumping people to the curb and shipping them to the poor community hospital down the street. So that ignored a couple factors, because the physician-owned hospital market has several submarkets. One submarket, which is half the market, is physician-owned community hospitals. What does that mean? A community hospital is, has an emergency room, it has primary care, it has general surgery, it has OB/GYN services. So half of physician-owned hospitals were physician-owned community hospitals. So by definition, full-service hospitals. Then there were physician-owned specialty hospitals, which is what folks really made folks upset, which there were three primary markets. One is physician-owned general surgical specialty hospitals, like doing hernia repairs, et cetera. There are a couple of those left, not as many. Physician-owned cardiac hospitals, which have giant ICUs, operating rooms, cardiac cath suites, emergency rooms. Because if you have a ST elevation MI, right, you're coming in through the emergency room, right? They're taking everybody, right? It's sort of hard to cherry pick patients having heart attacks, right? You're not right. The only thing you could do is open next door to McDonald's, right? So to increase your volume, but or the gym, right? If someone's working out and they have a heart attack, but it's pretty hard to cherry pick emergent cases. So they do CABG or coronary artery bypass, aortic valve replacements, cardiac cath, stents, echoes, stress tests, and that's a full service hospital. What they didn't like was the orthopedic surgical specialty hospitals, which are operationally more like an ASC with a small ER and a couple beds attached. So that's what made them upset.
They're upset because it's competition? What is it?
Yeah, it's competition because the specialty factories are focus factories. So a lot of medicine, some of medicine is an art, some of it is a science, and then the third part is some of it is a technical trade. So my childhood friend Chris is a carpenter who now is a superintendent, and he builds furniture. And the first furniture he built was, shall we say, good, but not his best product. Now, we're middle-aged, unfortunately, hair turning white and thinning, and his product is incredible, right? Because he has practice and he has volume, just like his product in home construction is incredible. And so a focus factory surgical specialty hospital has higher quality, lower costs, because there are things you do operationally that make it run better.
That's what happens when you specialize.
Yeah, and that's why you have a Toyota repair shop and a BMW repair shop. You don't have the Toyota BMW repair shop. That doesn't make sense. And usually the folks working on, gas-powered cars are not the people working on electric cars, because you have to specialize. Specialization is good and is a natural product of competition.
So hang on, I liked your point about cherry picking. Again, we're going to talk about this because this happened in 2010, goes into effect. These new facilities basically all freeze. We can actually talk about results,
right? Which are bad,
right? Which
the
are
freeze
bad.
Is bad.
The freeze is bad, but one part of this was financial gain, right? But there's still whole facilities exemptions from Stark laws, aren't they? I mean, even without this ban, can physicians just try and cherry pick and refer? Tell me what exists now.
Yeah. So if I I am a licensed physician in disclosure, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I want to go build a hospital, I could go build a hospital. I just couldn't build Medicare. Mm-hmm. And actually, there was a great study in Health Affairs 5-6 years ago, something like that. And they studied a variety of physician-owned hospitals, which opened after the Medicare ban passed. And so the hospital industry said, physicians are bad and don't want to treat Medicare or Medicaid patients. And so if that were the case, right, and if physicians were greedy narcissists and we just wanted to treat healthy rich people, which is not true, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we did, then there would be physician-owned hospitals treating rich commercial patients all over the U.S., only in the wealthy suburban markets. Atherton would have physician-owned hospitals. Wayzata, Minnesota, Bellevue, Washington, Wellesley, Massachusetts, they would all have physician-owned hospitals only treating commercial pay patients. Obviously, that is not the case right now. And then on top of that, if you look at that study in Health Affairs, they studied physician-owned hospitals that opened after the Affordable Care Act ban passed, and they all went bankrupt.
Mm-hmm.
Because to be a going concern as a healthcare delivery business, unsurprisingly, you need to be able to bill Medicare and Medicaid because it's on average half your payer mix. And if you think about it, if you're a hospital, like a lot of folks who get hospitalized are older folks, right? Or folks who are in poorer health, which are often older folks or poorer folks, right? Because access to healthcare matters. The other thing that you would realize is that physician-owned community hospitals are a great way to meet unmet need. Now, the last time I checked, most hospitals' ERs are overflowing. There are not enough beds. Right? You have people boarding in
Right.
the
It's
hallway.
it's not that you go to the ER and you're like, oh, this will be quick.
This
right?
is going to be quick. Yeah. This is going to be a great experience. It has gotten so much better in the past 50 years. In fact, it's about the same or worse. And CMS publishes these really embarrassing wait time statistics for emergency rooms. And if you look at them, you're like, oh my gosh, can we please have some more supply? And I don't think anyone has gone to the doctor and said, wow, that was a really efficient visit. I mean, there are some efficient places, but they are few and far between. Usually you go to the doctor, the joke is, and I made this joke because I've experienced it myself, not at my PCP, who is great and actually pretty efficient. But you go to the doctor and you check in, and then you sit in the waiting room, and then they take you back to a second area and check you in again, and then you sit down. And then they take you back to the area where they weigh you and check your blood pressure, and then you wait there. And then you go to the exam room and you wait more. And then the doctor sees you for 5 to 7 minutes, and then you're done. And I'm just thinking, one, I am a doctor, so this is ridiculous. I know how stupid this is. And also, I just spent 90 minutes of my time for a 5 or 6 minute visit. And then in the emergency room, if you go to the ER, you can wait hours. And so the idea that we don't want physicians to own and operate hospitals is sort of ridiculous, especially when you look at the legal profession, where non-lawyers are actually not allowed to own law practices. So you and I, Tom, cannot go out and invest in Wilson Sonsini or Arnold and Porter, however much we may like to, right? We can't do that. It's not allowed. But in medical practice, right, where we're taking care of people, and yes, we are billing Medicare and Medicaid, us doing that is not only considered statutorily bad, but we're often told it's unethical. And I'm like, this makes no sense. One, because hospitals all the time are cherry picking and dumping patients on each other. You go visit a county hospital and you will get these great stories. These suburban hospitals are transferring all these patients to us. You go in an academic medical center, they'll be like, this community hospital is always transferring us these patients that they don't want to deal with. And so the market evidence says that, hospitals are sub-segmenting. And in fact, there are a lot of specialty hospitals not owned by physicians, right? And they're phenomenal. So the Hospital for Special Surgery, which is, I have bad joints from doing martial arts for years. And so I know at some point I'm going to have to take a trip to, up north and visit these folks. I really don't want to, because I don't like surgery myself as a doctor. I don't like needles. All of these things I don't like as a clinician, right? And so if I go to the Hospital for Special Surgery, well, what is the Hospital for Special Surgery? That is a focused factory for orthopedics. Mm-hmm. If I go to the Mass Ear and Eye Infirmary, well, I think that's also a focused factory.
But Brian,
if I drive down the street to Innova Vascular and Heart Hospital, that is a tax-exempt specialty hospital. So we have specialty hospitals. We know they're good.
So why don't we have more? But I mean, so the argument, right, is what we're doing is cross-subsidizing. We're saying
Mhm.
if you allow this to happen, then the other necessary parts that don't necessarily make a lot of money for a hospital don't get subsidized. We won't be able to provide that. Hospitals won't be able to provide that kind of care to people, and so we've got to keep these specialties that we can be done cheaper elsewhere inside the hospital, inside this setting, so that they can make money there, so that they can subsidize
Mhm.
the more expensive but still necessary care elsewhere. What do you think?
Yeah, and that is absolute hogwash, right? Like running a business that way, that's not running a business, that's running a fiefdom. You need to have all lines of business become profitable and have a margin. And if you can't, then you need to change the operations. And part of the problem in care delivery is that the operations haven't changed. So my late father graduated from Northwestern in 1973, right? The disco era. He had what was a Chevy Impala or something. I'm trying to remember. No airbags, no anti-lock brakes, right? Ridiculous. And so I think about when he was an intern in 1973, and I think about when I was an intern, right? 40 years later, what'd you do? You got up, you pre-rounded, you checked the labs, you checked the vitals, and see the patient, check in with nursing, check the chart.
How
Same
much
thing.
has it changed? What's the marginal change at hospitals, right?
Yeah, nothing has really changed. And the reason it hasn't changed is an isolation from competitive pressures. And physician owned hospitals were a huge competitive pressure.
Um, stepping back for a second, which country is it that only allows physicians to own hospitals? Is it South Korea?
I believe that is correct,
Yeah.
but I'd have to double check on
So,
that.
oftentimes when you look at a policy like this and you hear, okay, well, so here on one hand, this is why they're doing it, and so maybe it's not maybe it's a good idea, who knows? But it's important to ask: is anyone else running the experiment? So it's always
Mm-hmm.
like, how would we know if this ban is doing what it's supposed to do, or is even a good idea? And it's helpful, I think, to look there and say, look, they're doing this, and they're not seeing the insane reactions like we are.
Yeah, and I would also add, shouldn't the workers be able to own businesses? And this sounds this sounds sort of crazy populist, but if you go to the tech world, right, and you look at successful tech enterprises, and I realize now that as some of them are much larger businesses, they have different policy considerations that people debate. But if you were a programmer at Amazon or Google or Microsoft, you got cash, you got bonuses, and you own part of the business. And those, many of those folks did very well building, creative products. Microsoft Word is something we use every day,
Right,
right?
Brian, but it's a different industry. Healthcare, and this is my devil's advocate for you, is just different, right? We
Is
can't
it?
it's this is the argument. It's different because if you don't allow these things to happen, if you don't protect groups and industries or hospitals or patients in whatever way, people won't get the medical care they need, and so we need to accept these trade-offs.
Well, I would make the argument that we have 60 years of centralized control and regulation, which has not really resulted in a great product. So we're at the point where if you are poor, you do not have great access to care. You might have pretty good coverage, right, through Medicare, Medicaid, ACA exchange plan. And if you're working, like you have employer sponsored insurance or ESI insurance, which is pretty good, but you do not have great access to care because the delivery system is clunky, consolidated, and lacks competition. And if we go walk over to the antitrust bar and talk to those folks who are way smarter than us healthcare folks, it's really fun because they just sort of look at us and you'll sit down, you'll have coffee with them. It'll be like, what? It'll essentially boil down to, they'll ask you what your problem is. And you'll be like, blah, 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 regulation, law. And they'll be like, no, 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 no. And this is across the aisle, whether you're a Republican, whether you're a Democrat, libertarian, centrist, whatever. Antitrust folks are pretty consistent. They're like, you don't have a competitive marketplace. You don't have price competition and you don't have non-price competition. And that is the problem. It's expensive because you don't have price competition, and the service sucks for many folks because you don't have non-price competition and your markets aren't segmenting. And then you're like, well, you think about it for a second, you sort of pause and maybe choke on your coffee. And they were like, you know what? That's sort of right. And so the fundamental issue is that the hospital industry didn't like competition and that physicians were being competitive, and that then got banned.
That's all there is to it. It got banned. This is a long running theme that we've chatted about on this podcast before, and I've written about. And oftentimes, when you look at a terrible scenario like this, and you say, "Well, why isn't this happening?" And the answer truly is, we don't allow it to happen. And so the
Yep.
solution is make progress by letting people do things. In this case, by letting people decide, you know what, I can compete. I can offer a better service. I would like to start a business and offer things. And by the way, I'm not forcing anyone to use it, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they're only going to use it if it is worth it to them, if I can
And
provide the quality and the price, and go from there.
and there's a lot of great arguments in that favor. One is, if you think people are cherry picking patients, which the evidence largely says that they aren't, pay the facility that's cherry picking patients less.
Right.
Like
There
risk
are
adjusting.
solutions.
Yeah, we can fix that.
The
And
existence of a counter argument is not reason enough to stop
yeah,
doing something.
and then the other argument is there are huge benefits from that the antitrust bar is very well aware of. There are huge benefits from competition, more market competitors, more price competition, lower price, and then also service delivery innovation, which is said. My late father practiced internal medicine in the hospital almost the exact same way that I did when I went through residency. The difference is I typed at a computer and he wrote on a sheet of paper, right? But it was fundamentally nothing has changed because you don't have service delivery innovation when there isn't competition. And if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, labor productivity growth for private community hospitals, it's pretty much flat since 1993. And that's sort of embarrassing because I was in elementary school in 1993, and now I am middle-aged and have a house and cats, right? And here I am, and labor productivity is relatively similar. The processes are similar, and I have voice dictation and ambient AI, right, which are good things to improve documentation, but the clinical operation model hasn't changed, and the price competition just doesn't happen. Because if you think about it, if you're a hospital executive, you have options. Your options include lobbying to get higher Medicare rates at the federal level, lobbying at the state level to get higher Medicaid rates, right? Beating up on your local managed care company. I'm a fan of managed care contract negotiations, right? They should be doing that. You can also, lobby to protect CON, to prevent your competitors from entry. You can also make sure that physician-owned competitors can't enter the market via Stark law. So we have all of these things which don't involve improving clinical operations, which is fundamentally what patients need. And what patients and taxpayers need is improved operations, more efficiency, and lower price, right? Like, look at what you get in terms of value for a car or a house today versus the value of healthcare services.
More spending, not a lot of changes.
Yeah. One of my colleagues came and said they got a bill from seeing a doctor for $1,600 from a large, and it's just like, what is the value behind that bill? Like, those are charge master prices.
Right.
So instead, you need a free and competitive market. And we need to not be afraid to remove unnecessary regulations and then also police bad actors.
I feel like we shouldn't even call them regulations. Like, this is a ban. This is
it is a ban.
Wholesale, not allowed to do something in the market that people would like to buy.
Yeah, and the real funny thing about this, so if we put on our markets hats, which is sort of our default, we're like, market competition is good, choice is good, right? People can make choices, innovation, weigh brands, and trade off. Then if you put on a different hat and you put on the perspective of the worker, shouldn't the worker be able to own part of the business? Don't we believe in employee stock ownership plan models? And right, like, you don't think that the nurse or the doctor or the pharmacist or the custodian should be able to own the hospital because somehow, right, they're biased or bad, and we don't think that having their voice improving clinical operations is not valuable? Like, I think that's a pretty valuable voice. And while I might still, as a patient, go to some tax exempt or private practice or corporate, it'd be nice to at least have that choice.
All right. Speaking of choices, so clearly you and I agree on this, but
Hmm.
so there's kind of like what would fix this and how do you actually fix it? So let's talk policy options for a little bit
Hmm.
because this was put into effect with the ACA. Is this only a legislative solution that we need? First, what could CMS do, or what could an administration do absent getting Congress to say, sorry, hospitals, you now face the wrath of competition?
Well, there's the statutory exception where CMS renders opinions about whether it's an underserved or high Medicaid need area. So CMS could do rulemaking to undertake that and modify that process. Congress also, go ahead.
I was going to say, but how effective could that be, right? Is that
I don't think
going to
it's a big enough
serve?
lever.
It's not huge. Is it 10% of the market, 15? Like what?
See,
How much can we hack away at the problem using just that?
I mean, you could probably get it in urban inner city areas, and I think in a lot of other areas, that rulemaking reinterpretation would not be effective.
But it also would be subject to being pulled back if with another administration.
Yeah,
at
lawsuits,
any point.
etc.
Right.
So I think statutory change is more effective, and there are lots of ways that you could do this. You could say, "Hey, I want to, repeal this ban for certain geographies." Right? Like there's proposed legislation looking at it for rural areas with a certain drive time from another hospital.
Mm-hmm.
You could also repeal the ban for, say, physician-owned specialty hospitals that are joint ventures with other hospitals. Right? So give them a ownership voice, but say it must be a joint venture. You could also
hang on. Sorry, let me explain that one for a second, just a little bit. You're saying you're allowing this if it's a joint venture because then you have outside investors, or other way around?
You're saying that you could say for specialty hospitals where the hospital industry had concerns, you could say that there has to be a hospital industry investor partner. It can't just be physicians.
Yeah.
You could also repeal the ban for physician-owned community hospitals, recognizing that they all meet the Medicare definition of a hospital of 24/7 care, emergency room, et cetera, and say, hey, we're just going to slice off that service market and deal with specialty hospitals later. You could also repeal it for all physician-owned hospitals and say, I think you're more efficient, and maybe there's some risk adjustment stuff, and I haven't figured out, so I'm going to just give you a 5% pay cut, right, compared to the rest of the market. You could also say, hey, I recognize that there are some problems with induced demand, and I'm going to repeal Stark Law in a managed care setting and say for Medicare Advantage or Medicaid managed care orgs, which have utilization review and prior auth, I would say Medicaid MCOs have a lot of utilization review. I'd say Medicare Advantage has a moderate amount. You could say that's a reasonable policing against induced demand for physician self-referral for physician-owned hospitals and other services too. So there are lots of options that policymakers have.
Okay, let's drill down on this last one for a minute, because when I've chatted with physicians about this exact policy, about the ban on physician-owned hospitals, one of the things that often just comes up is, well, we probably need to reform some Stark Law. Some Stark Law. So let's dive into that just a little bit more, because I feel like I don't understand as well as you physicians do, because you know what your restrictions are on yourself.
Yeah, of which there are many.
There are many, I know. So, but how do we need to do that to get rid of this ban?
Absolutely. I mean, that might be a cleaner one, either a physician-owned community hospital ban repeal or a Stark plus or minus a Stark repeal in a managed care setting, because the concern is self-referral. So if let's say I work for Presbyterian Health Services, right? It's a nice, good health system in New Mexico, and I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I'm no longer an internist. I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I can refer internally to Presbyterian's physical therapy, MRI imaging, use the Presbyterian OR. And in fact, Presbyterian could require that I do that. They could just say, you work for us. That's how this goes. And there are some actually valid clinical arguments that integrated care delivery can result in a better outcome for patients. And of course, then there's that needs to be counterweighed by the sort of anti-competitive concerns about self-referral and integrated care delivery. But there are a lot of clinical benefits from that.
Do we think that there's a huge negative effect of self-referral? I mean, is it really that big? I mean, I get that it's an argument, but I always wanted to measure the effect. Like, is it more than the cost?
I don't think so. I mean, it's hard to measure that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you're measuring the clinical benefits of coordination and integration, which are real. I think that the problem is that Stark law fundamentally prohibits physicians from doing that. So if I'm across the street from Presbyterian Health Services and I'm the orthopedic surgeon and I'm treating your grandmother or grandfather, and I want to send you to my own and operated MRI and physical therapy and operating room, like I can't do all that. There are some of those things I can do and some of those things I can't, a lot of those things I can't do. And that doesn't make any sense for the law to preference one type of market competitor versus the other and say, hey, you hospital corporation, vertically and horizontally integrated, you are a better, I think, as the law, that you are a better actor than that 5 or 25 physician orthopedic surgery practice, because the private practice is bad and the for-profit hospital or tax-exempt hospital or government-run community hospital, like, you are the good actor. So the self-referral is necessary for good integrated care in some circumstances. In other circumstances, not so. So if we think there's a problem with self-referral, like, address it for the whole system. Don't just say, hey, there's one business ownership structure where you just can't do that at all, but all those other folks, you can go ahead. That's like the government putting its finger on the competition scale.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Brian, is this a bipartisan issue? I mean, is it bipartisan being held back? Is it one side more than the other likes it? I mean, I know, we're on the market side of things, but I don't see a lot of people just full throated. This is a good idea.
I would say historically, and this is changing, historically it was a Republican issue because Republicans were grumpy about the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah, there you go.
And I would say that it has migrated more into a physician and nursing workforce issue as physicians and nurses and pharmacists have become increasingly unhappy with their corporate employment options and would like to have more options. And then you look at market consolidation in hospitals. So I would say if we were showing up in a conservative member's office, we would say market competition, small business enterprise, et cetera, et cetera. And if we were showing up in a more progressive office, we would say, shouldn't the workers be allowed to own the means of production? And like, both are accurate descriptions of this policy problem. So when I look at this policy problem, yes, I'm a markets guy, but to me, it seems like it should really be a nonpartisan issue.
I like it. That's, you know what? We're encouraging workers to seize the means of production.
Yeah.
You heard it here first.
Yeah. And it's like, I'm all for the capitalism and freedom, right? Like, I want to see that physician-owned hospital chain. I want to see that physician-owned hospital chain that's a publicly traded company. I want to see the HCA that's a publicly traded company. I want to see the version of HCA that's HCA plus doctors, right, in ownership. I want to see the whole range of that performance, right? That's where I would sit as a guy who believes in a dynamic, competitive marketplace. But I'm also understand that, some of our colleagues who have different feelings would see that as a way for the workers to have a voice in the save the business, and that's okay.
Yeah. So this has happened. This has been in effect for over a decade. We have the results. One of the striking ones you touched on a little bit is consolidation of physician practices, right? So physicians, you can no longer have this option of trying to go start a facility or go work for one. And so what do you do instead? You don't remain independent. Your options are more limited. And so you sell the practice to a hospital group or others. It's consolidated hugely. And then, of course, more consolidation means the hospitals, whoever owns those practices, has more leverage, can raise, isn't going to cut prices. Yeah, it's going to raise prices. This is one of the other fallacies I like to talk about a lot is just this notion, this, if you haven't done the Econ 101 stuff, that you need just a really big entity to negotiate and drive down. Like, how do you drive down prices? And I think if you haven't really thought it through, you just think, if I'm really big, I can drive down prices because I've got leverage and that's all there is. So it's what we've done here. We've made the hospital systems bigger.
Yes,
I'm not so certain that they've used it in the way that we wanted it.
Yeah, I don't think it's resulted in more pricing pressure. We want a more dynamic market. You want more entry, right? And more entry is going to be good. And if you look at related policies that restrict entry, like certificate of need, evidence is very good that drives up prices and reduces quality and reduces access. And instead, we want to reduce price, increase access, and increase quality. And the way you get that is from competition. if you look at any other marketplace, right? Any other marketplace in the economy, the places that are performing well are the places with robust dynamic competition, different business models, different sizes of business, different business structures, right?
The ability to price their own goods and
yeah,
right?
yes, like I am a automobile enthusiast, car nut.
Yes, you are.
Right? Like absolutely, you're gonna be so regretting bringing me on. But like if you look at cars, right, you have different segments that meet different needs, and you have different size manufacturers. You have boutique, hyper sports car manufacturers. You have mass-produced truck manufacturers. You have you have the electric only manufacturers. You have the ones that focus on hybrid. So you have this whole range of choices and competition, and you don't have someone sitting in the office saying, hey, actually, I'm sorry, Toyota, I just don't believe in hybrid cars. You're not allowed to do hybrid cars. No one is sitting in Baltimore or DC telling Toyota that they can't make hybrid cars or that your corporate structure has to be a certain way, right? That is, and if I walked into an automobile policy or corporate ownership policy discussion, people would look at me like I was absolutely insane to suggest, a certain product type is the only type that's allowed, or a certain ownership structure is absolutely not allowed. But that's fundamentally what we did in healthcare. And then we are curious and confused why there's so much consolidation and things are so expensive, and why physicians are like disillusioned and sad. And the answer is, it's like, the reason your doctor is sad is because their locus of control over their operations is gone. And they want to, like most clinicians, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, most people want to be more efficient and compete. But if you are an employee with no control over operations, you can't do that. And the employment model is going to be good for some of the clinical workforce, but it's not going to be good for the entire clinical workforce. And we should want people to have that choice in the labor market, which will then result in a more competitive service delivery market and lower prices. Right?
I'm in wholesale agreement, Brian. All right, here's my question now. Let's wave the magic wand and we get this done. We say, hey, section 6001, you're gone. Physicians, have at it. Nurses, pharmacists, go for it. Tell me, one, how long does it take to get these things spun up? And we're going to say, like, it's gone, and it's not. We're promising at least 10 years before this ban, is talked about in Congress again. What does that world look like?
It takes a couple of years, right? Because you have to organize capital. You still have to get licensed in the state as a hospital. States still have certificate of need. There are
not
35?
California, by the way.
Yeah. Well, there are 35 other states, I think, that have certificate of need.
Yep.
I forgot the exact number, but it's pretty high. So it's not an instantaneous. It's not like tomorrow the hospital incumbents are going to just absolutely be crushed, and all the orthopedic surgery and cardiac patients are going to be sucked out of the system, and that physicians are only going to open cardiac specialty hospitals, and only look for the tennis playing folks who have a heart attack, right? One, that's the building of businesses is not going to happen right away. It takes time. There are other regulatory barriers to entry. And also that will create an opportunity for the system to then be more creative, right? Some of these might be joint ventures.
Competition's coming. Yeah.
Competition's coming. So you're going to look at having a more dynamic marketplace. What can I do to improve operations? What can I do to improve price? And hey, maybe I should do a joint venture with some of these guys and ladies and build a, different delivery system, right? So my answer, and especially if you look at the current tax-paying hospital segment, is physician ownership is the greatest growth opportunity that industry has, right? I wouldn't look at that with fear. I would look at that with excitement if I were in their executive suite and say, wow, here's a great opportunity to take a segment of the physician market that wants to grow and change operations and partner with him and kick some ass.
I like it, Brian. You know what? I think I'm going to end it there. It's a good note. And now we just have to go out and work at making this happen. You've been working on this for years.
5+ years. It's one of, everyone in policy has a pet policy rock that they carry with them, in their pocket. And this is the one that is always with me. because, I think physicians should have agency. And I personally don't want to open a physician-owned hospital, but why should other colleagues of mine be prevented from doing that?
You know what? I actually would love to see you run a new hospital.
That
could be your 18th career. How about that?
That could be my 18th career. Yeah, I would probably get up very early and eat in the hospital cafeteria, and I'd always be hanging out at work, and that would probably be a problem because I probably work too much. I mean, I already work too much, but I work even more.
Indeed. All right, Brian, I like it. Thank you so much for chatting with me about this. If you liked what you heard, give us some feedback. You can find me on Twitter. I still call it Twitter, on X, at Tom V. Church. Brian is at Dr. Brian for Health. We'd love to get into a discussion about this, about why you think this is a good idea or a bad idea. Brian, thanks so much for chatting with me.
Thanks for having me.
The views and opinions expressed on 584 Vetoes are those of the authors at a particular moment in time and do not necessarily represent the views or opinions of their employers or their future selves.